Today, I'm scratch building the main station building on the Heritage Line, based on Newbury on the Berks and Hants. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome back to Donnington Castle Model Railway. And in today's video, I'm going to be building the main station building over on the Heritage Line. Now to do that, I'm going to take advantage of all of the bits of kit I've got to hand, so I'm sure the laser cutter and the 3D printer are going to come in very handy when I do this. Now, I showed in a previous video some models of Newbury Station that I was fortunately able to borrow, and I used those to figure out what a good size station building would be over on that part of the layout. And I identified that the main building from the down platform at Newbury is a really good style and shape and size of building for me to be able to use over there. It's also a fairly standard Great Western design, if there is such a thing, which is very much in keeping with the area the layout is set and the time period as well. Now, I don't want to create a complete replica of the station at Newbury because I'm not building Newbury Station. But what I want to do is create a model that people will look at and instantly recognize as that building, but adapted to suit the use of that building in the station that I'm building on the layout here. So that's going to be the challenge, I guess, to overcome as I go through this process. But a good place to start is actually the library in Newbury. As while this station building still exists in Newbury, and the basic structure is very clearly visible, as I'll show from a picture from Google Maps here. There have been some modifications over the years, and what I'd like to do is rewind the clock a bit and get a sense of what that building was like when it was built. And I've been given a reliable tip-off that the reference section in the library in Newbury has a large number of books in it that are going to contain photos that might help me in my quest. So I'm going to head off there now and start the research and get stuck into the project. And here we are at the old wharf next to what's technically the Kennet and Avon Canal, and here is the library. So let's wander inside and take a look. Now, this is my first time in the library. I believe we go in and upstairs, and there is quite clearly a local history section, and there is this shelf with all of the railway books on. So let's take a look and see what we can find on here. I've pulled out a few that I think might be useful with some pictures of the station. This is a great picture here. This is from 1957, and that really shows the building. Just incidentally, it also shows some nice fencing around the side that you might have to copy. Looking in these books has given me lots of good ideas. This is a photo from before the station was rebuilt. We've got some nice buildings by the side of the line and a water tower. Those might be good features to copy for around the station area. Oh, look, a Newbury's wagon. Most of you who watched my video on building Lambourne Station will know a little bit more about Newbury's, the furniture store in Reading, and we will talk about that again a little bit later. And in this book, we have some very useful architect-style diagrams of that building and the canopy. More on that in a future video. This shows that there were 1, 2, 3, or 5 doors onto the platform originally. That changed later on, and I'm going to modify that, I think. Also, there was no door out into the street, as we can see there. Now, these pictures would normally be really useful to make a model from, but I have the advantage that I have a copy of another model that I can use to get all of the sizes from. In the station now, we are in the early 70s. Not much has really changed. You'll notice there's no door onto the platform here as well. I can see a parking limit sign there on the wall. That might be a good thing to copy when we get to decorations later on. And this is an earlier picture again, but we can see lots of advertising all over the station. Hopefully we can be inspired by some of that. I think maybe a Newbury sign will be needed here. These books have given me lots of ideas for other little projects. This building here with what looks like a water tank on the roof that's not part of the railway, that might be an interesting thing to research. Let's stay on target and focus on the project at hand. I've got lots of information now, so let's head back home and look at the station as it appears today on Google Maps. Now, if we fast forward to today, this is what the station looks like. A lot of work was done when the electrification happened, so this building to the right was added then, and these new ticket barriers were as well. A few things to note, that this door has appeared since the early 70s. That's going to be a good feature for the station we're building here, because we want effectively access into the building from the street. So we need to add something like that. You'll note some of the fancy stonework. The window pattern is the same as when the station was built, even though these lower windows have changed. These upper ones look like they are still the originals. Still got the chimneys, and otherwise the basic structure of the building is the same. So between this and the historical photos, I think we're in a good place to be able to replicate this. Ordinarily, I might be more interested in those architect's diagrams to get exact measurements to build a copy of the station from. However, I have the advantage that I have the model that was made by one of the other members of Newbury Model Railway Club, and I can use that to measure up because he did all the hard work of creating that to scale. So as you'll see from these photos, we have something I can measure up and then transfer over into my design software to create something that I can cut on the laser cutter. Those of you who've seen my video on scratch building Lambourne station will know that I used 1.6mm balsa wood to make that. Here I want to try something a bit different. Oh, and there'll be a link to the Lambourne video in the top corner if you haven't seen that and are interested. So I'm not going to make this building the same way, and it's really because I've been finding it difficult to get good quality balsa of that thickness in the size necessary to make these buildings. So I thought I would try a different approach here, and that would, in this case, I'm going to make the main structure out of 2mm MDF because it's pretty cheap, easy to work with, and comes in big sheets. And what I'm then going to do is wrap the outside of that with another material, probably etched card. So we're here in Lightburn, where I'm doing all the design for my buildings. And you can see the basic structure that I've mapped out here using measurements from that model that we saw and just some common sense tests. The window dimensions and door frames and things like that, I've taken all from Lambourne, which was all measured from architect's plans. So it's a little bit of a combination of sources here, and they both seem to line up quite well. On here, you can see that I've got the outline structure of the MDF that I'm going to cut out. That's the green line. And then the black lines are just to engrave on that. They're not needed here because we're going to cover over this surface, but they're just useful to get a sense of what this will look like here. So you can see how I'm replicating the stonework and the window frames. I'm not going to emboss any of this. I'm just going to engrave it on. Hopefully that will look good. The advantage of this technique is that because this will have a card surface over the top of it, these window frames will be sunk into the building ever so slightly. I can then fit windows into these and still have a good sense of three-dimensional structure to them. Only other thing really to note here is I'm just using big tabs here to fix these corners in place. These are obviously 2mm thickness, which is how thick the material is going to be. And then that allows me to create effectively a superstructure, which we will then embellish as we go on. Just a note about designing in Lightburn. I'm quite lucky in that I can visualize 3D objects in 2 dimensions, and so I find it quite easy to design, certainly for structures of this type, in a 2-dimensional software package. You could obviously design 3D and then use that to create your pieces. so using SketchUp or something like that. That's something I may come to in the future when I'm doing things slightly more complicated and want to do a lot more mixing of laser cut and 3D printed items. But for me at the moment, this is absolutely fine. This is then the roof structure, so this shows you the overall shape. That will slot into this and keep that all square when these all glued together. Let me just show you a quick shot of the laser cutter that I use. It's a few years old now. It's a Creality Falcon 2, I think. So quite primitive in terms of its design, but it does the job for me. So I will get this file sent over to the laser cutter, stick a sheet of 2mm MDF on there, and we'll see what we end up with. And that cut out really nicely, and I've used some rocket card glue just to fasten that together. And as you can see with the card model in the background, that's looking just about right. Now, just a note on prototyping, because I don't create kits or anything like that, I don't tend to create a full prototype of the model. I tend to just build it as I go along. Sometimes I find that I make the odd mistake and I'll kind of recut or alter something. But generally, the first model I build is the one that you see at the end. The next things to design are the roof pieces. Now, these roof trusses I've effectively copied from Lambourn. I did add some notches into these to add some strengthening pieces, as I saw with some kits that people make. But because this is just for me to assemble, I didn't actually need to add those. These stand up perfectly well on their own, and I don't really need all these embellishments. There's also no reason here to make the trusses decorative. On Lambourn, you can see these. That's why these are the actual pattern that was used in Lambourn, and I think it's a fairly standard GWR pattern. And here I could have just made these solid triangles, but it looks kind of cool. I'll know that they're in there like that, so that's fine. And then the roof pieces, these are probably the most difficult bit to design when you're working in 2D. Because you don't necessarily know all the angles and don't want to sit there with your trigonometry and your sines and cosines and things to try and work out sizes. In my case, I measured them off the existing model. This is area, however, where you may find yourself recutting bits in the prototyping stage. So we've got the main piece along the back here. This piece fits into the front of the roof. And then you've got, for the gable ends on the front, you've got these pieces. All of this, again, cut from 2mm MDF, as it's cheap and easy, and will certainly come in sheets big enough to take the biggest piece, which is this roof here. So again, get these onto the cutter and see where we get to. And this is what we end up with when we put the roof piece and those roof trusses on. Hopefully it makes a little bit of sense as to why those are as they are for the roof sections that I showed you. Again, being able to think in 3D really helps for this. Positioning some of the gables is important for where the angles or the pitches of the roofs are going to be. But that will become a bit clearer as we get the roof sections on. Come the windows. These are very simple design, again in Lightburn and then cut in 2mm MDF. And then there is a sheet of overhead projector transparency film. And what I use is glue and glaze to stick those down onto that, wait for them to dry, and then cut round. And then these are being flush fit into the model itself, which is different from how I did Lambourn. Painted white. And then I also paint around the edges of them just to make sure there are no gaps where we're going to get light bleed if we put lighting in later. Now for the decorative skin, I guess, for want of a better term. And I'm making this out of, it's just about 1mm thick card. And what I'm going to do is, again, laser cut that and etch the brick pattern into that. And I've done a bit of testing and got the right settings, which you can see up on the right-hand side here for doing that. Same basic shape as the main structure, but if I zoom in, you can see I've now added an English bond brick pattern on here. but also kept the windowsills and all of this stone embellishment over the top. The back wall is slightly too long for the pieces of card that I'm using, so I've had to split this section into two. You'll note that on the corners, I've got this interlocking pattern. So these stick out from the edge of the MDF structure, and likewise on the corresponding other piece, and then those slot together to form the corners. And so it should just look like normal brickwork going around the corners. These are about, as you can see, maybe between 1 mil and 1.5 mil. So that should be just about the right thickness of card. So you get a nice interlocking pattern there. You'll see the bottom is blank. That's because I'm going to put an extra strip on to replicate the ones on Newbury. On Newbury, they are in engineer's blue brick. I'm going to do them in the same color brick, so not quite as fancy as Newbury. I believe Lambourne used this same approach of using the same color brick on those embellishments. So yeah, so that's how that looks. I've talked about creating brick patterns in the Lambourne video, so I won't go over that again this time. Nice and easy for you just to copy and paste small sections and build up the pattern. As you can see, we have the headers and stretchers in kind of alternating rows as you do in English Bond. So that's all going to go to the laser cutter. Then we need to figure out what color we're going to paint them. So let's look at that next. I'll pop up on screen now a photo of the brickwork at Newbury, which is quite distinctive in terms of the colour of the bricks. Now, from the research I've been able to do, I believe that these bricks were used on the entire Reading to Hungerford branch. I don't know which brickworks they came from, but I don't believe that they are the same colour bricks that are used elsewhere on the GWR. If anyone does know any different, then please do let me know in the comments. So to try and capture that colour, which is quite distinctive, I think, I've been doing a bit of experimentation. So I've got 3 different colours here from and these colours are slightly different on camera, maybe to how I see them in real life. On the left-hand side, we've got an ever so slightly orangey dark red. We've then got this slightly more orangey brown, and then again a bit more yellowy orangey colour on the right-hand side. And what I've done is I've painted them onto some brickwork just to test them out. And those are these colours here. On these other sections, what I've done is I've got some red wash and also some black wash, and I've just started going over those with them in different kind of amounts, just to see how that alters the colour of the brickwork. And I think from those experiments, this kind of colour here is what I'm aiming for. I think with a couple of extra coats of red wash and then some black wash over the top of that, I think that's going to look pretty close to the brickwork on the station. And a good reason for using that technique of a base colour and then some wash is that you get some variation across the brickwork, so it doesn't all come out looking the same colour, which I think is going to look good. You can see some pieces that have been painted up. The one at the top is the enamel paint with the red and the black washes over the top. Then using an acrylic to paint the stonework using Revel beige, and then those are then sealed with a matte varnish. I then use the same technique as I've showed in lots of other videos to use buff titanium acrylic paint to go into all of the pointing between the bricks and then wipe that back off. The advantage of doing it that way is that you dull down the colour ever so slightly and get a little bit closer to that colour that I was seeking. Now, you will notice here that this looks slightly more orange than other parts of the building. That's because I didn't really get a good consistent process for applying the red wash. So there are different shades across the building. We'll come back to that as that'll be a little bit more evident in a minute. And the next job is just to stick those down. So rocket card glue all over the surface, and then make sure they are nice and flush to the surface, applying pressure for a little bit. Next, I paint up and fit that skirting, so that extra layer of bricks around the bottom edge. Exactly the same technique as I painted the rest of the brickwork in. And once that's stuck on, it's time to move on to the roof. Newbury Station has a tiled roof, and the tiles are roughly the same size as the bricks and roughly the same colour as well, actually. So what I've done is on some very fine laser board, I've laser cut these strips with, I'm not sure if you can see them on camera, some slits cut down them to represent the tiles. And what I'm doing is then using some rocket card glue, sticking them down onto the roof sections and then overlapping them. This way you build up quite a nice textured finish. So Blue Peter style, here's one I did earlier. And hopefully you can see, if I just hold at an angle, you've got this lovely ridged texture down it. My errors in putting these on straight also gives a little bit of natural variation, the way that you do see in very old tiled roofs. And the station at Newbury is well over 100 years old now, so the tiles are not perfect. So I think that's a really good technique. It's a very time-consuming technique, I have to say, but I think that's going to give a great effect. Once they're all stuck down, I'll trim off these edges and round here, because that's where, on this side, for example, there's going to be ridging tiles along there, so I don't need to go right the way up to the edge. Okay, so that's going to be a bit of a job, so I will get all of the roof sections done like that, and then they will need painting. To show you the process for painting the roof, I've got 3 pieces here in different states. So the first one is obviously unpainted. The second one has then had that Humbrol 40, what was it, 45, I think. There we go, over the top. And then again, the red wash, and then a black wash, and then that final piece there is once those washes have been applied, I've gone over the top with a Revel red brick, quite watered down. And what that's done is, because I'm not going into the grouting here, I wanted to get a slightly different finish and different colour to the roof. So that red colour has just given it more of a kind of a pinky, reddy orange finish, which is different to the brick. And I think looks really smart and also quite similar to Newbury. Here's what our building looks like, and as you can see, I've started to add the roof pieces. I deliberately didn't add these until all of the pieces were made, because the sizing of these is a little bit less precise than the walls. I wasn't sure whether these would fit on, but as you can see, these end pieces are fitting nicely, and you can see where I've put those roof trusses just so they line up with the edge, so that back piece will now fit nicely on there. But you can also see the difference in colour there between the tiles. I've also painted the back of those gable ends in my stone colour to match the coping that's going to go on there in a second. Now with that back roof piece on, you can see how things are starting to come together. As you can see, there are a few gaps. Those gaps so far are going to be for ridge tiles, and the ends of the gables facing what will be the platform, I'll have some pieces to fit on those. But this is where we've got to. In terms of the main structure, there are a few bits of detail that are starting to go on, but I'm going to cover all of those in the next video, because this one is getting a little bit long, and therefore I think this is a good point to stop part 1. And I'll leave things there for now in this video. But don't worry, the next part will be coming up very soon. So you'll be able to see the rest of the process of building this station. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not already a subscriber, then please do consider that. There'll be a button coming up in a second. But I will be back very soon with part 2, and I shall catch you all really soon. Bye for now.